And Ashley, if you want to give me just a message in the chat on when you feel like it's appropriate to begin. Thank you. You should be good in any moment, I feel like. Okay, wonderful. So we are live. Thank you all so much for joining us for community conversation today. We are going to be talking about reflecting on the end of legislative session here in Oklahoma. We have some incredible panelists with us today. I'm really excited for this conversation. If you have not met me before, my name is Caroline Cole. I'm the statewide engagement manager for Oklahomans for Criminal Justice Reform. And I will, just let you guys know, really throughout my career, one of my biggest drivers and goals has been bringing impacted people and bringing the general public into the legislative process. It is so important that we are able to be able to engage meaningfully in the legislative process here in our state as it affects all of us. And, one of the things that I've continued to hear as I've worked with people who have lived experience or just concerned citizens is that the legislative process feels intimidating. It feels unapproachable. When you walk into the Capitol, it immediately is kind of this feeling of, I think for a lot of folks, almost a feeling of anxiety, right? Where do I go? What do I say? And so one of my greater goals in my own personal capacity and also with OCJR is to make this legislative process more accessible to everyone. And so that's really the goal of our conversation here today as we look at what's happening at our Capitol, what's happening in criminal justice reform. And we're also going to be talking about a bit of advocacy and what that can look like for you. So we're going to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. And then I did not tell them this ahead of time, but as I say your name, I have your title. But if you want to just unmute and share a little bit more about your role and its interaction with the legislative process in Oklahoma, I think that would be really helpful to our listeners. As we go into this panel, if you have any questions, please utilize the chat function or the Q&A function, and we will get to as many questions as possible. Ashley Bender with OCJR is here with us, and so she is going to be our tech support, and she'll be watching for any questions that come through. And also just a little disclaimer there is no stupid question. If you're thinking it, there's probably someone else thinking it too. So please ask away. So our first panelist that we have today, we have Cole Allen, who is a criminal justice policy analyst with the Oklahoma Policy Institute. Cole, if you'd like to unmute yourself and share a couple of words with folks.
Yeah, hi y'all. My name's Cole Allen. I work with OK Policy. As a criminal justice analyst, I spend some time getting to do some reading and research and writing. And then during legislative session, which is from February through the end of May, I get to go out to the Capitol and talk with legislators and help them understand what the data is saying around criminal justice reforms that they're proposing. And then I also get to interact with a lot of grassroots advocacy and helping connect people to what's going on at the Capitol. I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Cole. So happy to have you here. Our next panelist, we have Annie Bowles. Annie is the host of the News du Jour podcast, which I am an avid listener of it. If you don't listen to it, you absolutely need to. And she is also the owner of Sugar Free Media Consulting here in Oklahoma City. And this past legislative session, Annie has had some really incredible just interactions with some legislation she's been working on. And I think we'll be able to give us some incredible insight about just advocacy as a whole and what that experience was like. And so Annie, you're welcome to unmute yourself and say hello.
Hi everyone. So I started out kind of as an influencer and in the influencer space and eventually started doing consulting work for cause-driven groups to help them with their social media and sort of connect the dots for Oklahomans on what's going on in Capitol Hill, whether that's on the federal level or on our Capitol Hill. And I got to work on some legislation for domestic violence survivors just recently and helped pass the Oklahoma Survivors Act, which was really exciting. And I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Annie. We're so happy to have you. And then definitely last but not least, we have Representative Daniel Pay, who is with us. He is a member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, representing District 62, which is the West Lawton area. And Representative Pay is also the chair of the Rural Development Committee and has worked on several criminal justice issues. And so we're really excited to have your perspective if you would like to share a few words with our audience.
Of course. Thank you, Caroline, and thank you to OCJR for the opportunity to come and speak. And I think you did a good job covering my bio. I've been in office 6 years now, representing my hometown of Lawton and working on criminal justice reform issues, among other things. So I look forward to the conversation here in the next hour.
Wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. We've got a lot of questions. So I think we were very ambitious with the things that we want to cover here in this panel today. So what that's going to look like, we're going to start with some general questions for the panelists. You all are welcome to just answer the ones that appeal to you, piggyback off of each other, however that works best. And then after that, we have specific questions for each of you individually. And then towards the end, we will have kind of a couple of broader questions as well. So as we begin this conversation, could each of you provide just a brief overview of some of the most impactful bills that were passed this past legislative session?
I can start. So in the criminal justice space, there were a number of really big bills that we got to pass this year, some that we've been working on for a very, very long time. One of the bills is, sorry, let me make sure I get the number right, was Senate Bill 1770, which helped clarify some rules around expungement, the expungement process, which means that when people, after a certain amount of time, that they have finished their sentence and have been living in the community and being a productive citizen, that they can have their record expunged and sealed, which really helps reduce a lot of the stigma around being justice involved. It's easier to find housing and employment. And so that's a really, really important piece of legislation. There was also another really big bill around how we provide sentencing, so how we punish different kinds of crimes. It's House Bill 1792 that a lot of people have been working really hard for a number of years on. This bill helps to kind of put different types of crimes in different buckets and has started the process of providing guidelines for judges and prosecutors on how long to sentence for these general groups of crimes. It's not perfect. It hasn't done everything that we're hoping for, which we hope to ultimately help reduce the number of beds in our prisons, but it's a really, really important start. And the last one that I will talk about is House Bill 1629. This was a really big, really important voting rights bill for people who have been justice involved. Currently in Oklahoma, if you're serving your felony sentence, you can't vote. But once that's over, you're allowed to vote again. But for some people who had a commutation or some other way that their sentence was shortened, there was some weird gray area in the law where they couldn't vote until the original time of their sentence passed. So this bill cleared that up, and now people get to vote as soon as they are finished with their felony sentence. And so that's really, really great and means that more people can engage in our democratic process here in Oklahoma.
Thank you, Cole.
And certainly, I think out of all those, the sentencing reform bill was a huge step forward. It's been a lot of time behind the scenes, I know, with all different stakeholders. So I appreciate Representative Osborne and Senator Rader for their leadership on that particular piece of legislation. And I got to work with Senator Rader on Senate Bill 11, and that was one of my priority bills for this session. It deals with correctional education. More and more colleges and universities are going to prisons and offering comprehensive degree programs so that inmates, before they leave the system, can develop a skill or trade before they come back into the workforce. And so Senate Bill 11 would allow these individuals to be eligible for tuition aid as another incentive for them to enroll in these programs. The data is very compelling. 90% of people will leave prison and complete their sentences and come back into society. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want them back to work or back to prison? And I'm very happy that it passed unanimously in the House and overwhelmingly in the Senate, and it was signed by the governor. And it will help reduce recidivism, it'll help encourage more economic development and growth, and just empower individuals by giving them a second chance. So that for me was very satisfying to get that through. It's been over 2 years and had a lot of different meetings and obstacles to overcome. But that just shows that you got to be persistent in this process.
Thank you for that thought. And that will actually, that will be our next question, is talking about what some of those obstacles were. As we know, there's so many different factors that go into passing legislation. And so, Annie, I didn't want to skip over you, but would you like to share some of the legislation that passed?
I mean, obviously I'm partial because I worked on this bill, but I feel like the Oklahoma Survivors Act is super impactful. As of right now, Appleseed is estimating between 75 and 150 women that we know of currently fall under this new law for resentencing. And so again, these are women who were fighting for their lives and they committed a crime in trying to protect their own life. And so we do have self-defense laws, but basically what this creates is like, if they are convicted of the crime, they can be resentenced to a lower sentence if domestic violence was a factor in them committing their crime. So that was a really key component. And our bill had a lot of ups and downs that we can jump into in terms of obstacles, because there was a lot of drama and back and forth with our particular bill. But 75 to 150 women that we know of. There's probably way more, and there's definitely men as well who are affected by this new law. So I think this was a really impactful piece of legislation for sure.
Well, there is no denying that there's been some really incredible work done this past session. And, you know, typically when I'm working with advocates who are just kind of entering the advocacy space, some folks who maybe think legislation's boring, I'm like, you guys, it's like a sports game, right? It's actually like a sports game, and you're like, go, go, go. And then something unexpected happens and you're like, ah. And so what were some of the most significant legislative challenges that you all faced this session, and how did you end up addressing them? And we'll actually start this question with Representative Pei, not to put you on the spot, but I think this is such an important topic for folks to know too, because we so often think like, well, why don't we just pass this bill? Like, this seems to be, you know, a commonsensical bill to this issue. Why don't we just pass it? And it's often not that easy.
I'll start by answering the second half of your question with the how, and it really starts from the beginning of one's legislative term with respect to focusing on building relationships and getting to know your colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and making those friendships and building that trust. And I've done that for going on 6 years now, wherein I personally like to go meet members one-on-one, whether it's in their offices or on the floor or in the parking lot after work, and just talk to them, not just about legislation, but about their personal lives and what they like to do for fun, things like that. And certainly when it comes to advocacy, I'm a big believer that no matter if you're Republican or Democrat, there's always something that we can find a common interest in, whether it's what types of food you like or what TV show you're watching right now. That builds the foundation for success. And so when it comes to Senate Bill 11 or any other piece of legislation that I've worked on, I try to present the story about why such a bill is important, not just with the data, but also with the human impact about how their real lives that will be affected by the decisions we make. And that's what led to success with that bill, among others. I will also note that it takes a team. And so with this particular bill, prison fellowship was very helpful. And there are many afternoons where Sarah Decker and I would just go wander the halls and try to catch members who were still at the Capitol in their offices, and just talk to them about how this is good for fiscal reasons, it's good for moral reasons, and that sort of thing. And just understand that the system, the process is designed so that it is difficult to pass legislation. The founders did not want bad ideas to be translated easily into law. There are many checks and balances built in to our system and process. I think that's necessary. It challenges us as legislators to work extra hard, and provides mechanisms of accountability so that we can ask questions, debate, and thoroughly vet any given policy idea. And also makes it fun in many ways.
Well, mic drop after that response. Well, well said, beautifully represented. And I think you're so right. So much of it is about building, relationships and figuring out how to leverage those relationships and to create, like you said, kind of a team and a community around the work that's trying to be done here. So Cole or Annie, would you like to share about some of the challenges that you had this past session?
Sure, I'll go. And then Annie, I'm sure you can talk a lot about the Survivors Act. But generally, what I found is that this session, there were a lot of obstacles around data. OK Policy is a very data-driven organization. That's our foundation. And there were a number of bills this year centered around shoplifting that tried to roll back some of the really, really impactful positive reforms that we've been seeing in Oklahoma about how we incarcerate people, who we incarcerate. And many of these bills were being justified or talked about using misinterpreted data that came from the State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI. And when you have bad data, you get bad policy. And so a lot of what I and my colleagues worked on was making sure that lawmakers, the general public, and the media know what the numbers are actually saying. And in the case of Oklahoma, shoplifting has been steadily declining for years. And when we passed State Question 780 that made it so that we weren't sending so many people to prison for low-level shoplifting offenses, that number kept declining. And so there was no need to roll that back. And I found that if we can get a personal connection, like Representative Pay was saying, with lawmakers, with advocates, with members of the media, and you can share that information and be able to sit down and explain, here's what the numbers are saying, here's what the numbers are not saying, it's a lot easier to get people to understand what is actually happening and understand how to use data appropriately. Annie?
Actually, I have a follow-up question, Cole. So I'm interested to know, like, when you say bad data, are you saying, and maybe it's both, but like, are we talking about data that's actually incorrect, or the assumptions that we're making based on the data are incorrect?
Mostly the assumptions. Most of the data around these bills that was talked about came from official state resources. The numbers are good. It's just what they actually mean that gets lost in the process. And unless you take the time to sit down and read some of the footnotes that are on the website and see where the data comes from and how it's used, you can come up with some assumptions that are not actually backed up by the data that you're talking about. That's a great question, Annie. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm not a big data person, but I'm so curious about it. So I just wanted to learn a little bit more there. Yeah, so I mean, I'm just going to piggyback on what everyone else has said. Just relationships were definitely what got the Oklahoma Survivors Act passed. Actually, one of our lead lobbyists was a childhood friend of one of the survivors that were championing, April Wilkins, and she went to bat for this piece of legislation because her childhood friend was affected by it. So she could go to lawmakers, whether it's Governor Stitt or anybody on both sides of the aisle. And not only did she have that lobbyist skill set where she's already good at lobbying and talented at what she does, but she had the personal connection to really back it up. And I think that human piece, like Representative Pay was saying, was really what drove people's interest in the law in the first place, and really helped us get it across the finish line. But also, like Representative Pay was saying, like, you have this outfield of other organizations that help, whether it was like Palomar here in Oklahoma City or the YWCA, like those groups backing us up made a huge difference, especially when it came to the press and lots of other like components of getting a law passed, like public perception. Having those groups really stand beside us and say this law helps domestic abuse survivors was really important. And I think all of those connections really worked in tandem for us.
Well, thank you guys so much for that insight. And I'm curious too, I think sometimes these challenges, Representative Pay, as you mentioned, are part of that checks and balances process, right? It's just a part of it. We're going to have people who oppose the work that we're doing, and we're going to oppose other people's work. And that's just kind of the nature of what happens up at the Capitol. But I'm curious, do you feel like from this last session, were there any key lessons that you took away that you think would be helpful either next session or in future sessions? And how do you feel like that might affect your approach or strategy going forward? And don't feel like you have to show all your cards if you're wanting to keep some of these close.
Well, I'm reasonably hopeful for next session because we'll have new leadership both in the House and Senate. And with respect to the House specifically, I'm very excited for Representative Kyle Hilbert to come in and reset the tone. I think what happened toward the end of this session, all the dysfunction with the budget and the chaos with trying to rush through the final week, a lot of that was personality driven. With the two main leaders, Speaker McCall and Pro Tem Treat, being termed out, and frankly not knowing how to let go of power in some respects. And that typically happens for term limited members because there's a lot of uncertainty about what happens next for them career wise. But I think with Kyle coming in, especially with him being so young, he's about a year older than I am. He's got two young girls at home. I think that brings a new perspective to the leadership in the House. The Senate, this is a good example where elections are consequences. I can't comment on who their new leader is going to be. They have to start over from scratch. But hopefully they pick someone who can work with Kyle and the rest of us in the House. But that's what I would tell people who are watching is that we're in for a new phase of Oklahoma state government with different folks in charge in the House and the Senate. And we have a term limited governor as well. So that should make things interesting. But that's what keeps me hopeful is that we have term limits now in Oklahoma with 12 years being the max that you can serve in the legislature. And that brings in new change and new perspectives and new ideas. And I look forward to working with all those folks.
Well, we are all waiting eagerly to see what happens as well. And thank you for that insight. And Cole, would you like to answer about any lessons learned?
Absolutely. So I found and really leaned into this year in my personal relationship building with people, helping them see how policies or bills that on their face don't seem like they'll affect them actually do affect not only them, but all of us as Oklahomans. Some of the bills that would have put more people in prison for shoplifting, low-level shoplifting, would have affected how much money we can actually save and invest in things like mental health services. State Question 780 and 781, which the voters approved, they got it on the ballot and approved it directly. It set up a system where the money that we save by not putting people in prison who frankly don't need to be there, we invest into mental health. But if we roll that back, that's money that we can't save, and that's money that we can't invest in the needs of our communities. And so even if you think, oh, well, I'm not going to shoplift or I don't need to, how we punish and how we go about solving these issues affects all of us as taxpayers and all of us as residents of the state. So really leaning into helping people understand not only their role in all of this, but also how things can positively or negatively affect their lives.
I think, that's actually a conversation that we've been having a lot recently is just the interconnectivity of it. And I think it's easy for us sometimes to say, oh, well, that doesn't affect me. That affects those people over there, right? But it really does affect all of our communities. And of course, as a result, it affects our entire state, which we all care about. I assume most people in Oklahoma care about the state that they live in. So yeah, that's, I think, a really valid point there. Annie, would you like to share any thoughts?
I'm so sorry. What was the question again?
Sure. So the question was, no, you're fine. The question was specifically, were there any lessons that you learned this legislative session that you'll bring forward with you into future legislative sessions, or any key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of in my constitution as a human being as well, but I feel like it's not over till it's over was the main lesson. With the Oklahoma Survivors Act, we overcame a governor's veto. I mean, I definitely used to think, especially when I was a lot younger, veto is you're done. But I'm learning, and I really learned from this session how much or how much work the legislative body does to overcome vetoes all the time, and how many vetoes really happen here in Oklahoma. I think that's something that the average Oklahoman doesn't understand quite, or like maybe doesn't know quite how uncommon it is that we have so many vetoes. So overcoming a veto is something that's possible, and it's not over until the session is over. And you got to keep fighting sometimes. And like you said, that it's a game or a boxing match or sports, it definitely felt like that at times. You had to like really pull it out of you and keep fighting. And we had a lot of late nights and early mornings and long distance phone calls with, people who were helping us in DC and things like that. So my biggest lesson was it's not over till it's over.
I will be quilting that on something and having it propped up in my home somewhere, because it is an emotional journey as well, right? This is an issue that you care about. It's impacting real lives. You're anticipating how it's going to affect the rest of the community and so forth. And so when it feels like sometimes there can be these needless setbacks, it's like, no, like what? So thank you all for answering that question. And then we are actually going to pivot now into some of the individual questions. And Cole, I have a question for you first. Kind of a broad question, but just generally, how does the Oklahoma Policy Institute gather and use data to educate policymaking?
Yeah, so I was very much more an English and history person in college. So I'm not on our data research team that really does all the super number crunching. So I can't speak to specific techniques, but we utilize a lot of public access data on the state court website to see what's happening in courts, who is going there, what kind of charges are being brought up, how are they being sentenced if they're found guilty. And that really helps us understand the trends across counties and see kind of what the policies that we have in effect right now are doing on the ground in Oklahoma. We also work really closely with the Oklahoma County Jail, with the jail trust, to track the data of who is in the jail, how long are they there. We track down by race and gender to bring a lot more transparency to this process, which for Oklahoma County especially has been a bit of a long journey. Jails can be really dangerous when they're overcrowded, and so when we bring that to light and we can help bring transparency to the public and to the media, we can address problems before they arise. And that has really helped bring down a lot of or I should say, bring to light a lot of the policies that need to be put into place or revoked in order to make this system better. And so data across the board, I think, is really important. And I want to say the numbers don't lie. You can misinterpret them, but the numbers really help us understand what's going on. And if you know what you're doing, you can really bring to light the truth of what is otherwise sometimes a really cloudy process. Thank you for that, Caroline.
Yeah, that's such important work. I mean, sunshine really is the greatest antiseptic. And so, it in kind of across different policy issues that I've worked in, there's always been some kind of foundation of transparency and accountability. And so I'm just curious, I didn't actually have this question planned, but I believe, and again, I'm not the expert on this, but I believe that Oklahoma is one of the few states that actually has a platform like OSCN where this information is available across counties. Isn't that correct?
Yes and no. There are states, Iowa has a fantastic data transparency process with their courts, but some other states have a much worse system than Oklahoma. And what we have is useful. It can definitely be improved, and that takes investment to the courts. It takes investment, especially in rural counties, making sure that they have technology and internet needs that aren't currently met. But yeah, we have a pretty profound tool at our disposal. Could it be better? Yes, but it is in many ways ahead of a lot of other states in the country. So it's really great that we have access to that tool.
So I guess ultimately kind of what my question was from that though, and I think the work being done at OPI is so incredible, and it's very challenging, I think, for like someone who is a part of maybe the general public to interpret that data in any meaningful way, or to be able to access any kind of transparency on that level. Do you see there, and again, I know this would probably just be coming from your personal opinion, but what do you see as being kind of that next step in transparency for Oklahoma?
Absolutely. I believe that if we can make this information just easier to access, currently a whole string of buttons you have to press and windows you have to go to. So just making it easier for the public to access. We have OSCN, the state court network, doesn't include all the counties in Oklahoma. And so there are some that are on their kind of own system. And so if we can bring it all under one umbrella, where it's the state in just one place that advocates, members of the public, or government officials can work on, that I think is going to be a huge boost in transparency, so that people who are interested don't have to go searching for it. It's all just there. And then they can see what's happening and find the answers that they're looking for. So I think bringing it into one system is really the next step that we really need.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the general public sometimes, you know, knowing where to go to find it first, knowing what buttons to click second, and how to make it all mean something that would be meaningful to them is a whole nother obstacle, again, which is why just the work that you all do is so vital to Oklahomans. So thank you, Cole, for your input. And so the next question is for you, Annie. So tell us about your experience this past legislative session with advocacy, and then also kind of a broader question, what role do you feel that social media and digital platforms will play in modern advocacy and the legislative process?
I feel like my role was really like a front-facing person, because I was working with Oklahoma Appleseed, who developed the legislation, and similar to OK Policy, they're more wonky. They're attorneys. They're crafting the details of legislation and agonizing over specific language and words, and that's their job, and they're so good at it. And they wanted somebody who could really kind of be the face of things and like talk to the public about it. Use my existing platform to educate people and help people understand what the bill was about and how to get involved. And so our petition kind of went viral on change.org and ended up with 20,000 signatures on it. And that ended up being this tool that we used in our lobbying efforts in those conversations. For anyone who's unfamiliar with what happened with our bill, it did stall out after the governor's veto. It went to the Senate, and we had a veto override in the Senate within 24 hours of the veto. So we thought, okay, this is going to be the process, but that's kind of where it stalled for weeks. It was 2 to 3 weeks. And during that time, I really focused my efforts on getting signatures on that petition. And it ended up being this tool that we could use as a bargaining chip. Like, hey, there's 20,000 people outside the gates, watching this. And that ended up making people nervous and making them pay a little bit more attention and decide how to play their cards right, because they knew people were watching. And so I do feel that if you can get numbers and you can get people involved in paying attention, it can help you get important legislation passed, because it helps our lawmakers to sometimes take it more seriously if they know people are watching and invested emotionally and otherwise. So I do think it's a really important tool. And I think people are starting to use it in more creative ways. And I do a lot of like explainer videos with talking heads, and I use, pieces of data that were developed by OK Policy or Oklahoma Watch and all these other non-doc, all these other incredible orgs. And I just basically crunch it down and make it digestible for the busy, everyday working Oklahoman. Yeah.
I think that's something that you do so well, and why I always tell everyone to go listen to News du Jour. And so and I could go off on this because I really am such a fan, but it's breaking down these issues that may seem unapproachable or complex, and you word it in such a way that I then feel like I can have an educated conversation about it with other people. And on the social media side of things, I personally feel, as a community organizer as well, that, social media is kind of the great equalizer, right? You don't need a law degree to get involved. You don't need to travel to your state's capital. You can get tuned in, tapped in, and take action all from your cell phone. And like you said, it really does have that kind of impact or pressure for lawmakers, because you've got 20,000 people who are ready to mobilize any second on a certain topic. And that is so important to have those voices heard for people who otherwise may not be able to participate. So thank you, Amy, for that and all the work that you've done. It's been incredible to watch that journey.
Thank you.
So Representative Pei, I have a couple of questions for you. So as a legislator, how do you balance constituents' interests with statewide priorities with your legislative decisions?
It's a great question, Caroline. And it's taking a lot of practice over the years. And I think it just depends on each member and their leadership approach and style. I've come to peace with the notion that I'm not going to make everyone happy. I'm going to vote certain ways, make certain decisions that will make some people happy and some people not so happy. And that's okay. And one lesson I've learned over the years is that you don't lose re-election based on how you vote on one, two, or three different bills. It's about, are you connected with your constituency? If they see you in district at Walmart or at the gym, are you approachable, and can they trust you if there's an issue that arises? And I'm very proud of the work that our office has done in terms of constituent services. For example, during COVID, when people struggled to get unemployment benefits, we were constantly in touch with the unemployment office at OESC and trying to make calls and send emails to get people the help they need. Those bread and butter issues, that's what most people care about at the end of the day. So when it comes to deciding based on what's important for my particular district versus the entire state of Oklahoma, it does come down to cost benefit analysis. It does come down to determining the pros and cons of any given legislation. But at the end of the day, just being at peace with making the best possible decision and being able to articulate my reasoning, my logic as well. I think that's what's kept me going. I think that's really the balance you got to strike. And when it comes to military issues in particular, of course, I'm going to vote to support Fort Sill and the veterans in my community and represent that constituency. But when it comes to education or mental health, these issues do affect every single Oklahoman. And I think that's why, even though we're a body of 101 different representatives, we all have those same priorities that we come together on at the end of it all. So it's a little bit of a mix, I would say, to answer the question of representing your constituency and trying to think about the long term for the future of the state. And that's what's beautiful about our country, is that this is a very citizen driven process, and we are in Oklahoma citizen legislators. We're only up there at the Capitol in Oklahoma City February through May predominantly, and we're back home at our districts. Many colleagues have other businesses and priorities. For me, this is my full-time gig, and so I'm doing conferences. I'm filing interim studies this week and doing more research. So it's a very fun, unconventional experience, that's for sure.
And I think, what I'm hearing you say, and a key word that's stuck out to me is balance. And you didn't say these exact words, but what I'm gathering is also just being of service, right? How can I make the most educated, balanced decision for all the folks that live within my district? And like you said, it really is kind of a dance. It's somewhat of a juggling act to consider all of those things. And so we applaud you for your service in that way, and thank you. And so I have one more question for you, and that is, what legislation are you most proud of from this last session, and what impact do you hope it has?
I've always spoken about Senate Bill 11 and the effect it's going to have on the prison system and just the economy as a whole. I think a lot of great benefits when it comes to encouraging people to be empowered, to offering them a second chance once they leave prison. But I will also add, in these times of economic strains with inflation right now, I'm very proud of the fact that we did pass the grocery tax elimination. And that's something that Republicans and Democrats have been advocating for a number of years now, and to see that finally get across the finish line, that will have direct impact on everyone's bottom lines come August. And that's a really good piece of legislation that was also passed this year.
Wonderful. And so we are actually going to pivot again. We have about 7 minutes left to the panel section, and then we are going to pause for any questions that some of our audience may have. So we're going to pivot back into doing more of kind of like the group questions. If it's helpful, I can pick someone to start it off so it doesn't feel like you go, no, you go. What are some common misconceptions that the public has about the policy process? And this kind of two-part question. So what are some common misconceptions the public has about the policy process, and how can the public better engage with legislators to influence policy effectively? And actually, Representative Pei, I'm going to kick this back over to you.
I think the biggest misconception with the legislature in general is that this is a full-time body and that we meet year-end. I know some states like Pennsylvania, that is the case. But the real meat and potatoes of the process takes place between February and May. So when it comes to directly going to the Capitol and advocating, those are the best months to do so. I would also encourage folks that if you have ideas for different legislation and bills, to reach out to your representative and senator well before then, and not just an election year as well. I get with November coming out, there's a lot of excitement for different campaigns on the ballot, but typically we begin considering ideas for legislation during the holiday season. About December is when the initial deadline is, and then January is when we have to file the initial bills. So take time during the next few months over the summer. It's very hot outside right now, so there's plenty of time to be inside and brainstorm creative ideas. So take time now, and then during the holiday season after the election, reach out to your representative and senator and see if you can work on filing different bills for the 2025 session. Because once February rolls around, it's a mad dash until sine die come May, and it goes by super quickly. But I think people assume that we're working year-round at the Capitol when it's only 4 months out of the year. Now, granted, there's still a lot of good work that happens during the interim, and we have wonderful assistants to help us connect with constituents and try to offer resources and services. But the main process is really February through May. Outside of that, it's a two-way street, in my opinion. We have to make sure as elected officials that we're responding to constituents, but also constituents have to reach out to us and come up with different ideas so that we're tag teaming through it all.
I love that. Thank you. I think that's such an important message, to reach out and build that relationship, because it again, just talking back to kind of our theme of this conversation around accessibility, and part of that, like you said, is a two-way street. So would anyone else like to share about common misconceptions about the policy process?
Representative Pei took one of mine. The legislative process is not all backroom shady unseen actions. Some of it does happen out of the public eye, but there is so much of it that does happen where it's open to the public and you have opportunities to engage. But I want to say that there's a misconception that the legislature is the only way to create policies in Oklahoma. We have this fantastic tool, and actually a right in Oklahoma for the citizen-led initiative petition. It is right in our Constitution. It's the foundation of the Constitution says it's the first right of the people. It's our foundation of actually how laws get passed. So I highly recommend you, if you are interested in an issue, if you have a policy idea that you are passionate about, reach out to your lawmaker. Please, that's very important. But also start talking with your community. And if there are other members who are interested and also believe that your idea is a good one, file a petition, an initiative petition to change either statute or the Constitution. There have been some changes to the process. Now there's a filing fee, but still, if you can get enough people involved, you can crowdfund that and maybe get some national or some state advocates who know a little bit more about this process and can help you engage in this. That's a great way to get policy passed. It's hard, it can be expensive, but it is so important that we use this tool, this right, while we have it. And there's currently a petition going around right now, State Question 832. It's about the minimum wage. If you're interested in signing it, that doesn't mean that you have to support it or vote for it, but if you would like to see it on the ballot, I encourage you to research it, see if you want to sign it. If they will be at any probably big community event in your area. And if not, make your own petition if you're interested in it. So that's my plug and my misconception about how policy works in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair analysis. And, I think we need more community organizers, right? We need more people who are willing to shoulder that burden and help take some of that responsibility in getting people organized so voices can be heard. And, as a lived experience advocate myself, sometimes it's a lot. Like sometimes it is an emotional burden. Sometimes it takes up, your evenings or your early mornings. And but it really is such an important duty and responsibility that we have as members of this state. And so, Annie, I want to give you a chance to talk as well. Did you have any thoughts about common misconceptions about the policy process?
Yeah, I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me is just that it's a common misconception that everybody understands how it works and all the ins and outs. And I feel like when I was working with Appleseed, there were several times when I'm working with attorneys where they had to look things up and see, okay, like how many days after, it's voted through the legislature, does it become a law passively? Little details like that we had to look up and just double check ourselves. And like, those are attorneys who work in this space and who have done this before, and they're still double checking things. So long story short, don't be afraid to ask a dumb question. There's probably somebody else who's also wondering the exact same thing. And if not, you can at least get an answer and then you're informed better going forward. And also a lot of this stuff is online. So like if you do have a question, you don't want to ask it, Google it. And like Cole was saying, a lot of this is public record. You can watch the proceedings live online. So if you're someone with a full-time job and you want to get more involved and you wish you could be there at the Capitol, you can watch it. And I think, with our law, and I was even told our law had things that like were very back rooms that were unusually back rooms, but the vast majority of it was right in front of the public's eye. And so I do think it's fun to watch a bill go all the way through the legislature. And if you're someone who's wanting to like dip your toe, maybe pick one to watch as it goes through and get involved with and see if they have petitions to sign or any events they're throwing. We did a ton of like advocacy days where we would train people on how to knock doors on the Hill and things like that. So Oklahoma Appleseed is a good resource for that, but there's a ton of incredible groups in Oklahoma who can help you get involved.
Yeah, thank you for that, Annie. I mean, we're all online. We're waiting. Like, if you want to engage, we are literally have like open, outstretched arms. We would love for you to come partner with any of our organizations. And so Ashley did just send me a little message in the chat. She said, as of right now, we don't have any questions from folks. And so I just encourage our audience, if you do have a burning question, like now is your time, please submit your question. But I'm going to take this as feedback that we're doing a really good job because apparently we're answering everything. So I love that for us. So last and final question. What advice would you give, and maybe we touched on this a little bit in the last question, but what advice would you give to someone who wants to get involved with advocacy but doesn't know where to start? And anyone's welcome to jump in and take that question.
I could start. So OK Policy, this will be a little bit of a plug. OK Policy, we have a grassroots arm called Together Oklahoma. We have regular meetings, especially during the legislative session, around different issue areas. We also have meetings in our communities in person and online for people who just want to know more about the process. We go over the bills and the issues that are happening at the legislature. We listen to concerns. This summer, we are starting up our annual listening sessions, which is where we go and we can we can listen to people and ask, what are you concerned about? What is it like where you live? How do these policies affect your life? Is there something that we are missing? And that's, I think, a great way to listen, to other people and what they're thinking and what they're experiencing, learn that you're not alone, but also a great way to affect what some nonprofits and advocates are doing, learn how to join them. So I highly recommend you check out Together Oklahoma, and we can absolutely help you get connected to your legislator or people in your community who are engaged in almost any policy area that you are concerned about.
Thank you, Cole. I saw that you all were doing the listening sessions, and I think that's just such a powerful tool. And so if you are located in any of those communities, I think, as you mentioned, Cole, those locations are on their website of where those listening sessions will be. But if you're in your community and you're like, why is no one paying attention to XYZ problem? This is a perfect forum for you to be able to start getting those thoughts out there and get people started thinking about solutions. Would anyone else like to share any tidbits about advocacy?
I would say just, oh, go ahead, Annie.
No, you go ahead.
Mine's short and sweet, but I'd encourage you, whoever's watching this, to reach out to your legislator, invite them to go get coffee or lunch. If they're doing the job right, they should respond pretty quickly and have those conversations with you. But start building those bridges, building those relationships with your local elected officials. I get what happens in Congress and DC. It takes up a lot of the oxygen right now in the news cycle, but get to know your local elected officials, not just in the state legislature, but also city council and school board, and then go from there.
Thank you. Annie, would you like to chime in?
I mean, mine is just a really, again, short answer, but like a really passive way is to start following OK Policy, and Oklahoma Appleseed and groups like that have events. And that way you're kind of passively learning about what they're working on and what legislation is going through, but also seeing opportunities to get involved, whether it's the listening sessions or other events they're throwing, and maybe something clicks with your schedule or resonates with you in a particular way. And then that's your foot in the door. And I do think, there's nothing more passive than just hitting the follow button on social. And that's just an easy way to like get in the pipeline and hear about what's going on and start following things more closely.
Yes, that's perfect. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say one more thing. Voting is so important. Some people are having runoff elections in August, so that's a great way. Candidates, I'm sure, would be willing and ready to meet with you if you are interested in what they are running on or want to just get to know them more. And if not, still try to get to know people who are running on your ticket or research them. Learn what you can vote for and who you want to vote for, and just show up and vote, because that is really the first step in affecting all this policy, is voting on who your elected officials are, because that's ultimately how this policy gets made.
Very true. Truer words have not been spoken. Thank you, Cole. And I just want to take a moment before we start to close out. Let's see, Ashley, do we have any other folks who have maybe popped in a last minute question? And I will wait on that. I'll be watching the chat to see if Ashley says we have any questions. But I really just want to take a moment to thank our panelists so much. Thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us to talk about these important topics. And I hope everyone listening found value in what was discussed today, and that we met our goal of it feeling easily accessible. Really, it has been such a pleasure to spend this afternoon with all of you. And okay, Ashley did say, okay, people are saying thank you, and they're also saying that they want to know more about the listening sessions. And so, Ashley, if you would want to maybe, is there any way we could grab some information from them and we can connect them with TOK? Or just direct them to their website? I guess it is on their website.
I can share the website information. So the website is togetherok.org. I can put that in the chat as well. I don't know if it'll show up on social media, but at least if you're on Zoom, you can see that. And that has the information. There are in-person listening sessions in a number of different communities, and we also will have a virtual option and a option for different for specifically for tribal citizens or people affiliated who want to talk more about those issues. So that's a great way to listen. Please reach out to me or anyone at TOK if you can find the contact email there. I promise you they get read. So if you have questions, please let us know, and we will be very happy to help you figure out which is the best session for you to attend.
Thank you, Cole. And Ashley mentioned that she will copy and paste that into the chat of where this conversation is happening. And so I just want to leave everyone kind of with some final thoughts. And that is, if you are interested about criminal justice reform or other issues too in your community, really now is kind of the time to get involved. We're a few months away, several months away from the next legislative session. And so start reading up. As Annie said, follow some organizations on Instagram, on Facebook, just kind of acclimate yourself with what this broader conversation is, and then hit the ground running next legislative session. Go up to the Capitol, go meet with local officials, contact your legislators, as Representative Pei said, and it's really more important than ever. And so thank you all for joining us. We do have this webinar every quarter, so our next one will be in a couple of months, and we'll be announcing that soon. And thank you again, everyone, for participating today and for spending your afternoon with us. Bye. And this apparently takes a second for us to tune off of the live streaming, but